Hello and welcome to Newsmakers, where we go beyond the headlines to the stories that matter to you in Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara. I'm your host, Louis Butko, and on today's show, we will be getting an update on the TVO strike, which is now in its 9th week. And to do that, I'm very pleased to be joined by the host of their flagship current affairs show, the Agenda, Steve Paikin. A born and raised Hamiltonian, Paikin began his career at TVO in 1992, and before that was at CBC, while also contributing to the Hamilton Spectator, among other assignments across Ontario. A graduate of the University of Toronto with a master's degree in journalism from Boston University. He's also written 8 books, produced a number of feature-length documentaries, and served as moderator in federal and provincial leadership debates. But right now, he's joining his TVO colleagues on the picket lines, a strike that has now gone into its 3rd month. And Steve, obviously, I want to talk about the strike. There's a lot to get to, but something that's near and dear to both you and I is our love of the black and gold. That's the Hamilton Tiger Cats. They're finishing up their regular season this week against Montreal. They're in Montreal next week in the semifinal. Are they going to pull it off? Can they make it back to the Grey Cup here in Hamilton?
No.
Oh, no optimism? Come on, Steve.
No, they are unfortunately running up against the Toronto Argonaut team, which is, I think, arguably one of the greatest teams of all time. I think the Argos are probably going to finish up, 16-2. And I think if you look back through history, and it's shocking because they're using a guy who was essentially a backup quarterback for the last few years. But the Argos are too strong this year, and I'd be shocked if anybody beat them.
So to that point, Hamilton set to host the Grey Cup. You were here in 2021, if I have that correct. Now, as a city, how would you feel about the Hamilton Tiger Cats, or about the Toronto Argonauts, lifting the Grey Cup at the home of the Hamilton Tiger Cats? As a longtime fan, I have to imagine being in the building for that's got to have some mixed feelings.
Louis, I've seen this before. You have to remember something here. My mother was co-chair with Ron Foxcroft of the 1996 Grey Cup, in which the Toronto Argonauts and Edmonton Eskimos played in a blizzard. I guess that was at Ivor Wynne Stadium, and it was a fantastic experience. But the sight of Doug Flutie and his Toronto Argonauts lifting that Grey Cup on our home field, let's just say it was problematic for me.
I'm sure it'll be problematic for a lot of fans. If it does happen, listen, I still have some belief that Bo Levi Mitchell is going to turn back the clock in the postseason, but we'll see. Speaking of the CFL, their former commissioner, Jeffrey Orridge, is the CEO of TVO, and after your union rejected what they called their final offer, he wrote, quote, "I am disappointed that our CMG employees voted not to accept TVO's final offer. Unfortunately, this will serve to prolong the strike, which now enters a new and uncharted phase." He's not wrong. This is new. This is uncharted in the sense that this is the first time TVO has taken strike action. What was your reaction to his response to the rejection of the final offer?
Well, Louis, what do I say? It's a mess. And I think a lot of people are very unhappy about the situation. You're quite right. TVO's been around for 53 years. This is the first time that the employees have ever been on strike. I don't want to get deep in the weeds on this with your viewers and listeners right now, but I'll just put a couple of facts on the table here. Over the past decade, when the government of Ontario's books were in pretty bad condition, TVO employees were told to settle for 0 and 1 and 1.5% annual increases to their salary, and they did, right? There was no strike. The employees settled for that amount, saying that until the province of Ontario's books were improved, this was the best we could do. But the clear implication of that was in days ahead or in days to come, once the state of the province's books were improved, so too could TVO's offer to its employees. Well, the state of the books is improved, and the offer, in the majority view of the employees that TVO is offering, is still well behind inflation. That's a fact. The offer from the employer is well behind the rate of inflation, and as a result, the offer was turned down. Now, we've only had I know TVO called it the final offer, but we frankly have only had one vote on one offer, and I assume employees thought that when that offer was turned down, we'd go back to the bargaining table and each side would put a little water in its wine and try to find a way forward. And that hasn't happened. There are no talks happening right now. There are no talks planned. And we seem to be in a stalemate, and it's not good.
What is it? You mentioned the rate of inflation. The number there from Mr. Orridge was 7.7% over 3 years. I saw 4.5% year over year is what the union. What specifically on top of keeping up with inflation? Livable wages. What else is the union fighting for in this?
Nothing. I mean, the fact of the matter is that inflation's been running at 5%, 6%, and 7% over the last couple of years. And TVO's offer, the first year starts with a 3, the second year starts with a 2, and the third year starts with a 1. And, I understand. Look, this is not about me. I've been very satisfied with my wages at TVO in the 31 years that I've worked there. But for a lot of the younger kids who are making, in many cases, significantly less than people who work elsewhere make, this was an opportunity to not fall dramatically further behind inflation than they already have. And for whatever reason, TVO feels it can't improve on its offer. And for whatever reason, the employees are saying, look, you have to do a little bit better than that or we can't come back to work. So we are where we are.
Now, as an arm of the government of Ontario, I mean, Jeffrey Orridge appointed in his role as the governor of TVO. I mean, do you get the sense that the province is dictating, what's happening here? Do you get the sense that Stephen Lecce, where is this? Like, where is the pushback coming from?
Well, you've touched on something that's very important here, and that is that when you are an agency of the Ontario government, which TVO is, you're never really sure who you are negotiating with. I mean, ostensibly, the union sends representatives and TVO sends representatives to the bargaining table. But obviously, given that TVO's board was appointed by the province, TVO's CEO was appointed by the province, how much of what they are saying at the bargaining table is what they are saying and how much of it is what the province of Ontario is telling them what to say. I mean, I'm not at the bargaining table. I never have been, so I don't know, but it's a reasonable question to ask.
Now, somebody who might not watch TVO might shrug their shoulders and say, well, they're on strike. People go on strike all the time. How are those people maybe not aware of how this strike is being felt by them, even if they're not TVO watchers?
It's interesting. When I used to host the Agenda, we had a guest on frequently named Erin Kelly, who was with Advanced Symbolics, Inc., which is a public opinion research firm out of Ottawa. And she literally, Louis, about 10 minutes before you and I started talking, sent me the results of her latest, she calls it a general population analysis. And she asked a simple question: do you support the TVO strike or you don't support the TVO strike? And I'm going to put this up to my camera here, and I hope you can see it. That yellow arc, that yellow-orange arc, is the percentage of people who support the strike. And as you can see, it's overwhelming. So I think there's an understanding among the general population that people who have fallen further and further behind inflation for many, many years, whose responsibility is to make the programs and to write the columns and do the work on the TVO website that they enjoy and consume in their daily lives, it seems to me like they'd like the organization to do a little bit better by those employees. And yet we are where we are.
Well, and, I get the sense the last 64 days, a lot has happened in the government of Ontario. TVO, you are a smaller, stronger team like us here at CHCH. We take great pride in what we do. We take great pride in that being together and asking those tough questions. There's a significant fewer journalists at Queen's Park because of the strike, is there not?
110% true. I can't tell you how frustrating it is for me, for the people I work with, that with all of the significant developments happening both at Queen's Park and around the world being felt at Queen's Park, and we can go on and talk about Middle Eastern affairs if you want to, but I can't tell you how frustrating it's been not to be able to be on the air and conducting our, what I think most people agree are pretty straight ahead, fair, balanced, reasonable, intelligent discussions on these issues. We really want to be on the air right now, and we miss not being able to do the jobs that we really love doing.
And you and I both know how difficult it is to arrange those interviews with politicians and newsmakers, as the name of this show is, and absolutely having one less outlet for them to be held responsible, to be asked questions. I agree. Obviously this is hurting Ontarians, even if you're not a regular watcher of TVO. And, TVO, obviously something I watched as a kid growing up. TVO Kids was a big part of my life growing up as a kid without cable. So obviously I want to see it back sooner rather than later. You mentioned Middle East.
I hear it every day from people. I'm on the subway. I was on the GO train. I was in Hamilton yesterday visiting my parents, took the GO train, back and forth in a bus. And I just hear it every day from people saying, Steve, we need you back on the air. We love you back on the air. Where are you? Why aren't you on the air? How do we get you back? And I say to people, believe me, I want to be back on the air, but we got a problem.
Yeah. You mentioned Middle Eastern politics. Let's kind of localize that. Sarah Jama yesterday was booted from the NDP caucus, then was censured by the legislature. Obviously, it's been an interesting couple of weeks at Queen's Park, but obviously across the world. What did you make of what went down yesterday with Sarah Jama?
I think overwhelmingly I feel bad for Sarah Jama, and I feel bad for her because I think she has missed an opportunity to be a person of tremendous significance in the province of Ontario in general and in Hamilton Centre in particular. And by that I mean, Louis, there are not a lot of people of color down at Queen's Park who've been elected. There's 124 people down there and very few people of color. And she was one of them. She is one of them. She's also the only person out of those 124 MPPs who needs a wheelchair to get around. And had she done what her party preferred her to do, namely be a team player, be the best champion for the rights of disabled people that she could be, I think she could have had an enormously positive influence on this province and on the city of Hamilton. And unfortunately, and for reasons that we understand, she's married to a Palestinian person. She cares about this issue deeply. She's young. She's 29 years old, so she may not be, if I can put this delicately, a fully formed adult. Even I at 63 am not a fully formed adult, so it's a lifelong quest for many of us. And she's only been in public life for less than a year. So you add all that up, and there's a lot of inexperience and a lack of understanding of what the job entails and the requirements to be a team player when you are elected as part of a caucus. You've got that running headlong into a situation where she wants to say what she wants to say about what she wants to say when she wants to say it. And obviously an irresistible force has hit an immovable object here, and as a result, she's out. And it's too bad because, obviously she's not going to be greenlit to run as a new Democratic Party candidate when the next election takes place. And it's extremely difficult to get elected in this province as an independent. I don't know whether she'd run as an independent, but if she did, very hard to get elected as an independent, which probably means her career in provincial politics will be over at the next election. And it's too bad because she had a lot to contribute if she had figured out how to do it properly.
So some people might argue, and I saw this argument on Twitter, obviously being here in Hamilton, a lot of NDP supporters having elected her. They said that's exactly what's wrong with party politics, is that you have to toe the line. You have to be a team player. Is that a fair argument, that she's just trying to speak for herself? This is censuring whatever Marit Stiles said about the bill that it was introduced and passed, censuring her, that this is sort of the same thing. By kicking her out of caucus, you're basically saying your voice needs to say what we want you to say.
I think that's an exaggeration. I don't think her voice needs to say what the party needs her to say under all circumstances. I think there are opportunities, and I've seen numerous examples. There's a guy running for the leadership of the Ontario Liberals right now named Nathaniel Erskine-Smith. He's a member of Parliament in Justin Trudeau's caucus. He frequently votes against his party. He frequently speaks against his party's position, but he does so in a way that is constructive and in consultation with the party, and they have given him a certain amount of latitude to say what he wants. Sarah Jama didn't do that. She didn't consult with her colleagues. She didn't consult with the leader. She didn't consult with the leader's office. She just did what she wanted when she wanted. That's a failure to understand the reasonable constraints that party politics puts on individual members. And we saw it in Doug Ford's caucus too, Louis. I mean, there were certain members of Doug Ford's team who didn't want to take the vaccine during the heart of COVID. And what did Mr. Ford do? Did he say, oh, that's okay, you don't have to? I mean, I have a rule that everybody has to, but you don't have to? No, he didn't say that. He said, look, the rules for our caucus are you got to take the vaccine or you're out. And some people wouldn't take it, and they're no longer MPPs. They got kicked out. The reality is Sarah Jama got elected as the member for Hamilton Centre on the NDP ticket. She ran as a member of the New Democratic Party. And with that advantage, that gets you fundraising advantages, that gets you support advantages, that gets you resources that you wouldn't otherwise have if you just ran as an independent candidate. If you're going to accept all of those benefits as running on a party ticket, well, there are strings that come attached. And you have to understand that if you want to play party politics at Queen's Park. And clearly, she did not understand that.
You mentioned the premier, and I have a feeling he's chagrined that this has happened because there is a lot going on. There's the reversal of the Greenbelt. We saw the reversal of the urban boundaries. That'll be felt here in Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara. There's an RCMP investigation. Did this not just fall on into Doug Ford and the PC government's lap because they can continue to change the subject now that Merritt Stiles has removed JAMA from caucus? Maybe it'll go away, but this seems like it fell from the heavens for the Doug Ford and his PCs.
Couldn't agree more. The fact of the matter is the official opposition's job is to hold the government to account. And there's nothing that Merritt Stiles and her NDP caucus wanted to do more than keep the focus on the Greenbelt, keep the focus on the urban boundary, keep the focus on the housing crisis, keep the focus on the Stag and Doe Party and other examples of potential malfeasance, which officers of the legislature, the Auditor General, has investigated this kind of thing. The Integrity Commissioner has investigated these kinds of things. She very much wanted to keep the focus on those things. That's her job. Very difficult to do that when you've got one of your backbenchers making news on a completely different subject that takes the focus off of those things. Now, I'll say one caveat here, Louis, and that is, as much as the official opposition wanted to do that, Doug Ford did throw her a lifeline. And the lifeline was when he said some things that seemed, well, to many ears, over the line. To call Sarah Jama an anti-Semite who has a hatred for Israel, who has always, he went on and said some things. I don't need to repeat them here. Mm-hmm. He went on and said some things, and as a result, he made himself part of the story. She's potentially going to sue him for libel. He has, I gather, a couple of days left to consider whether or not he wants to apologize or withdraw those comments. Warren Kinsella is a very well-known and long-standing political consultant. He used to work for Jean Chrétien when Mr. Chrétien was Prime Minister of Canada. And Warren puts it rather bluntly, but not inaccurately, when he says, when your political opponents are on fire, you don't call the fire department and help put them out. You let them burn. And Doug Ford, perhaps by overreaching in his comments about Sarah Jama, violated that rule. He threw them a lifeline by insinuating himself into the story in a way that he perhaps should not have done. So again, this is all part of what's unfolding now at Queen's Park. And obviously those of us who used to be in the business of watching it and trying to analyze and explain it will continue to do so.
Yeah. You mentioned Nate Erskine-Smith. I'll let our viewers, listeners know. We have lined up a number of the Ontario Liberal leadership candidates, and they'll be joining us on this show in the coming weeks. But let's talk about that. We are about a month away from that leadership election. There is a debate tonight. Bonnie Crombie seems to be the favorite based on people that I've talked to. Nate Erskine-Smith trying to make a late run. Where do you see this Liberal leadership race right now? And do you see much changing in the next few weeks?
Well, I can't predict the future, but I will say that there are some markers right now that people like me who do what I, or used to do what I did for a living, look to try to determine where things are. And what do you look for? You look for who says they've signed up the most number of new members, because this is not going to be a delegated convention. This is going to be one person, one vote. Mm-hmm. And so, Louis, the Crombie campaign has said, we've signed up the most new members of all the candidates. You look for who's raised the most amount of money. I think the Crombie campaign has raised over $1 million. That's far more. I think it might be, in fact, as much as the other three candidacies combined. So you look for who's getting the buzz. You look for who's getting endorsements from other members of caucus or from Liberals across the province. And yeah, all of that wind appears to be in the Crombie sails right now. Now, it's one thing to have all that lined up at this stage of the game, but again, December 2nd is when the actual voting happens. And, it's one thing to sign people up. It's another thing to get them out and actually voting. And that requires a great on-the-ground organization. And that's when you really separate the wheat from the chaff. So, at this stage of the game, with whatever we are here, 5 weeks still to go, 5.5 weeks still to go, I'm not prepared to say this thing is over, and I don't think anybody should be.
Makes sense why 3 of the leadership candidates have gotten back to me in my request for an interview. I'll let you determine who that 4th one is, who has not yet gotten back to me in terms of coming on this show and making their case. Steve, I really appreciate you making the time. One more before we go. Let's go back to the TVO strike. If, you mentioned that public support, we saw it on that survey you held up. But if somebody listening to this, if somebody watching this wanted to help support the CMG on strike, what can they do?
Well, I think a couple of things. Number one, I think it's never a terrible thing to call your MPP and say, look, can you guys do anything about this? I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, the government of Ontario is responsible for TVO and presumably could unstick this stuck situation. And if enough people called their MPPs and said, get in there and help unstick this thing, presumably that would be helpful. There's also a strike fund. I'm a member of the Canadian Media Guild. There's a lot of people right now who they haven't had a paycheck in 9 weeks, and they're wondering how they're going to pay the rent next month. And if anybody wanted to make a contribution to the Canadian Media Guild strike fund, they could do that as well. I'd just love to see this thing over. I know we all want to get back to work, but I think everybody wants to get back to work with a little bit of respect and just a little bit of acknowledgement by TVO management that the last offer just wasn't quite there. And if they could improve it that much, we could get this behind us and go back to work. So I'm watching for that.
Well put. Steve, thank you so much for joining us, making the time this morning. I really appreciate it.
Oski wee wee, Louie.
There you go. Oski Wawa. My thanks to Steve Paikin for joining me today. My thanks to you as well. My thanks to Mike Corsten, who directed this program. And once again, you can like and subscribe however you found this episode here of Newsmakers. If you're watching, you can scan the QR code on your screen. Wherever you get your favorite podcasts, you can find us, or you can go to chch.com/podcasts. From all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louis Butko. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.